In the architecture of the human psyche, there lies a form deeply embedded in myth, dream and memory, the archetype of the wise woman. She is not simply an older woman, not merely the result of years passing. She is a psychic figure, symbolic of depth, clarity, mystery, and integration. In many cultures, she once held the position of the healer, the seer, the keeper of ancient truths. She represented not what had passed, but what had arrived, a combination of experience refined into insight. Yet in modern society, this archetype has been veiled. The later years of a woman's life have become flattened by narratives of decline and disappearance. The luminous threads of wisdom have been replaced by silence, the glow of maturity diminished by the fixation on youth. But she has not vanished, only been forgotten. And now, she is beginning to stir again. To be over 60, for a woman, is to stand at the edge of something sacred. It is not an end, but a doorway. The body, having traveled decades through change, joy, pain, birth, loss, love, and labor, begins to echo a quieter rhythm, more in tune with nature than culture. It is at this threshold that the wise woman archetype begins to call. She does not beg for recognition, nor cry out for relevance. Her power is not in being seen, but in seeing. She no longer chases, she summons. But for many, the journey back to this archetype is not immediate. The cultural mask, the persona, often clings tightly, whispering that beauty is behind, that relevance has passed, and that invisibility is now a fate, not a choice. And yet, deep within the unconscious, something resists. A whisper from the shadow self, the part long exiled by mirrors and magazines, begins to speak. I am not gone, it says. I am not fading, I am becoming. This is the beginning of the return. The return to the wise woman is not cosmetic, it is existential. It does not ask for plastic masks or fleeting performances of youth, but for alignment. And this alignment is not limited to the inner world alone. The body, too, seeks integration. It asks to be cared for not as an object to preserve, but as a vessel of energy, intuition, and expression. It is here that the symbolic meaning of nourishment becomes critical. Vitamins, especially those often neglected with age, are not just biochemical agents. In the symbolic language of psyche, they can be viewed as rituals of affirmation. They say to the self, you are worth being supported. You are not evolving. When a woman over 60 reaches for certain nutrients, it is not an act of desperation, but of reclamation. She is not trying to be young, but to be whole. And in doing so, she brings forth the wise woman in a culture that fears her most, a woman who does not beg for attention, because she is rooted in attention to herself. This re-emergence is not sudden. It requires listening to the body, to the breath, to the emotions that have been muted for the sake of family, career, or conformity. It is a movement from outer identity to inner essence. The wise woman archetype rises not from power gained, but from power released, from the release of comparison, competition, and the frantic pace of a younger ego still needing validation. There is, instead, a slow confidence, a soft strength, a beauty that does not sparkle but radiate. She does not need to prove her worth in the eyes of others. She becomes the mirror in which others begin to see differently. What makes her beautiful is not the absence of wrinkles, but the presence of intention. Her skin may not be smooth, but it holds the poetry of seasons survived. Her eyes do not gleam with naivety expectation, but with understanding. The vitamins she takes, the walk she honors, the sleep she protects, the water she drinks, all of these become acts of quiet rebellion against a culture that tells her to disappear. And perhaps that is the ultimate transformation, not of appearance, but of identity. To be 60 or 70 or beyond, and still choose joy, beauty, and vitality, is to reclaim the crown of the wise woman, not the brittle tower of nostalgia, but the grounded, symbolic crown of self-knowledge. This is not a return to youth, but a return to truth. It is the body and psyche aligning in harmony, each honoring the other as sacred. In the deep waters of the human psyche, numbers hold symbolic weight. Among them, 3 is the number of wholeness, the union of opposites, and the emergence of something new. It is the number of transformation, of movement from duality into integration. In mythology, it is the triple goddess, maiden, mother, and crone. In alchemy, it is the 3 phases of transmutation. In the realm of the body, mind, and spirit, The Trinity represents the totality of being. When women over 60 turn to a trio of specific vitamins to support their well-being, they are not merely participating in a health routine. They are unconsciously invoking a sacred structure, a symbolic triangle of vitality that binds together the fragments of age, experience, and self-renewal. This trinity of vitamins, D, C, and E, is not incidental. Each one embodies a distinct element of restoration: the physical, the emotional, and the spiritual. Together, they form a map, guiding the older woman back to herself. They do not operate as isolated agents of youth, but as emissaries of balance, calling the body back to its deeper rhythm and reminding the psyche of its timeless nature. In the language of symbol and archetype, these vitamins are more than chemical compounds. They are modern-day elixirs, threads connecting the conscious will to the unconscious longing for wholeness. Vitamin D, the first of the three, is sourced not merely from food or supplements but from sunlight itself. It is the body's memory of light, the internal sun. Symbolically, it represents the fire of consciousness, the masculine energy that activates and illuminates. With age, the skin's ability to synthesize this vitamin decreases, and with it, the connection to vitality can begin to wane. But in supplementing D, women are not simply correcting a deficiency. They are reclaiming the solar principle within. It fuels not only bone strength and immune function, but a psychic sense of inner presence. The warmth of D radiates through the being, reigniting a relationship with energy, movement, and clarity. It brings the woman out of the shadows not of age, but of cultural amnesia. She remembers that she is not a fading reflection, but a living light. Vitamin C, the second, acts in a different realm. If D is the sun, C is the crystal. It clarifies, heals, and binds. Biologically, it is the architect of collagen, the weaver of connective tissue. Symbolically, it is the rebuilder of broken parts, the emotional healer that stitches back the fragmented pieces of identity after decades of external demands and internal sacrifices. C is the emotional body's ally. It reduces inflammation, not just in the joints, but in the heart. Women over 60 often carry unspoken griefs, hidden angers, and deep wells of tenderness that were never allowed space. The replenishment of C, consciously or not, marks a movement toward restoration, a desire to feel resilient and whole. It works invisibly, like the unconscious itself, strengthening from within and offering the subtle glow of emotional well-being reflected in the brightness of skin and the calmness of spirit. Vitamin E, the final component in this trinity, is the oil of preservation. It protects against decay, oxidation, and entropy. In the symbolic world, it is the guardian, the feminine archetype of the protector who shields the inner sanctum from the corrosive forces of time. E embodies grace under pressure. It does not fight aging with aggression, but with fluidity. It honors the natural cycle while ensuring that vitality is not lost to neglect. This vitamin plays its role not just in skin health and cellular protection, but in the deeper psychic sense of being held together, of not unraveling. Women who take vitamin E are engaging in a subtle ritual of defense against disintegration, not out of fear, but from reverence for what has been built over a lifetime. E is not merely anti-aging, it is symbolic of memory, coherence, and continuity. Together, these three vitamins form a triangle, and in the symbolic language of transformation, the triangle is a container. It is a vessel for change, a crucible in which old forms are burned away and new ones are shaped. For the woman over 60, taking these three into her body is not merely a routine act of self-care. It is an unconscious participation in a deeper cycle of rebirth. She is not prolonging youth, but embodying vitality. She is not denying age, but expanding into its full potential. This trinity also holds emotional resonance. D speaks to her desire for clarity and agency. C connects to her emotional resilience and ability to regenerate. E aligns with her wisdom and capacity to preserve what matters. Each one speaks to an aspect of her being that seeks integration after decades of fragmentation. The modern world has split her into roles: mother, worker, partner. But these three nutrients work symbolically to draw those pieces back together into a unified self. Not a self defined by others, but a self known inwardly and lived outwardly with quiet power. The trinity of vitality is not a formula or a fad. It is a return to symbolic nourishment, a deep, knowing that wellness is not just the absence of illness, but the presence of meaning, energy, and embodiment. When the woman over 60 engages with these vitamins, she does not do so as a consumer, but as a participant in an ancient cycle, the cycle of descent, initiation, and return. The process of aging, particularly for women, is not merely biological, it is psychological, symbolic, and archetypal. In the unfolding of the human psyche, aging summons the confrontation between two of the most powerful Jungian constructs, the shadow and the persona. These two forces, often misunderstood and underestimated, play a defining role in how a woman experiences herself after 60. They are not abstract ideas, but active psychic realities, shaping perception, emotion, identity, and how one moves through the world. To understand beauty and attraction in the later decades of life is to understand the dance between these inner structures, especially in a culture that prefers masks over mirrors. The persona is the face we wear for the world. It is the adaptation, the social mask, the cultivated self designed to meet expectations, fulfill roles, and gain approval. From early adulthood into middle age, a woman's persona is often heavily influenced by cultural ideals: motherhood, youthfulness, productivity, beauty, sexual desirability. It becomes a performance of worth, reinforced by rewards of attention, affection, and social validation. But as the body changes and roles begin to shift, children grow, careers wind down, the male gaze drifts elsewhere, the mask begins to crack, the persona no longer fits, it loses its utility, and what emerges from underneath is not always welcomed at first. This is the shadow, the repository of all that has been repressed, denied, forgotten, or deemed unworthy by the outer self. The shadow contains the anger not expressed, the sensuality not claimed, the ambitions sacrificed, the sadness hidden behind smiles. It also holds gifts, creativity, power, intuition, and the wildness of soul that has waited decades to be acknowledged. But to engage the shadow requires courage. For the woman over 60, it may begin with discomfort, the sense of becoming invisible, the grief of a changing body, the feeling of being misunderstood or dismissed. Yet these are not signs of decline. They are signals from the unconscious, calls from the shadow, asking to be seen. In many ways, beauty after 60 is born from the willingness to face this shadow. When a woman begins to peel back the persona she wore for the sake of others and makes space for what has been buried, something extraordinary happens. She reclaims authenticity, not the polished, filtered version of self, but the raw, powerful truth of her own being. Wrinkles no longer appear as flaws but as markings of experience. The body, though changed, becomes sacred ground, respected for all it has carried, birthed, endured. The face, less symmetrical than before, reflects a deeper radiance. A wholeness that cannot be bought, only earned through self-confrontation, and yet society often resists this transformation. The collective persona, the cultural face we wear together, still idealizes youth, speed, and surface. Older women are told to become invisible, or worse, to disguise themselves as younger. This creates a psychic tension. To survive socially, the woman may feel she must cling to the outdated persona, even as her soul urges her to evolve beyond it. She is caught in a liminal space, not yet fully claimed by her deeper self, but no longer belonging to the world she once moved through with ease. This tension is not pathology, it is initiation. It is the very friction that makes transformation possible. To emerge from this psychic crucible, the woman must begin to separate who she truly is from who she was taught to be. In this unraveling, the real beauty of aging is revealed. A radiance not defined by youth, but by depth. The outer world may stop looking, but the inner world starts seeing with astonishing clarity. The woman who was once split, public and private, desired and dismissed, begins to integrate. Her presence sharpens, her voice steadies, her gaze carries weight. This integration of shadow and persona manifests physically as well. When a woman begins to live from her core rather than her constructed image, her vitality often returns. She moves with intention, not performance. She dresses for expression, not approval. The lines on her face become stories, not signs of failure. She may still use products, care for her skin, or take vitamins, but these acts become rituals of reverence, not weapons of resistance. She is no longer chasing youth, she is embodying essence. In dreams, this transformation may appear as descending into darkness, only to rise with treasure. The shadow, once feared, becomes an ally. The persona, once rigid, becomes flexible, no longer a mask, but a window. Others may begin to notice, not with the admiration reserved for youthful beauty, but with respect for something rarer, authenticity. There is attraction in this, not because it conforms, but because it transcends. It is beauty drawn not from symmetry, but from self-possession. Aging then becomes a spiritual and psychological rite of passage. The woman, no longer bound by the old masks, walks with a different power. She is no longer what others projected onto her. She is what she has always been beneath the persona. And through the shadow she once feared, she finds a kind of beauty untouched by time, the beauty of a soul, fully seen by the one who matters most, herself. The woman over 60, if she listens closely, begins to sense a subtle stirring, not a demand for youth, but a longing for alignment. The desire to look radiant, to feel attractive, to appear younger is not merely vanity. Beneath this surface impulse lies something ancient and symbolic, the yearning for coherence between the inner world and the outer form. This is not a superficial pursuit. It is a form of alchemy, a transformation of the self that begins deep within the psyche and expresses itself gently through the skin, the eyes, the way one holds silence. Inner alchemy is the slow, soulful process through which the fragmented self begins to merge, and as this occurs, something visible shifts. The outer glow emerges not from products or procedures, but from balance, depth, and integration. Alchemy, in its traditional sense, was never just about turning lead into gold. It was a spiritual science, a coded language for inner transformation. The body was the vessel, the soul the fire, the emotions the ingredients. When a woman over 60 engages in self-care, when she nourishes her body with vitamins, restores her sleep, reconnects with stillness, she is engaging in a deeply symbolic act. She is placing herself into the crucible of transformation, asking not just to look better, but to become more whole. The glow that arises from such work is not cosmetic. It is archetypal. It carries the imprint of someone who has dared to walk through time with eyes open and is still willing to learn, adapt, and refine. The modern world is obsessed with surface, but true radiance does not come from erasing lines or mimicking youth. It comes from attending to the subtler aspects of the self, the emotional wounds unhealed, the memories unprocessed, the needs unspoken. When these are brought into awareness, when space is given to the neglected corners of the psyche, energy is released. This energy, no longer bound up in repression or self-denial, moves freely. It infuses the body with vitality. It softens the face, enlivens the eyes, and restores a sense of inner equilibrium. A woman who tends to her inner life, who nourishes her intuition, honors her emotions, and listens to her dreams, will often be perceived as glowing. That glow is not illusion. It is a result of subtle alignment. Physical nourishment is part of this process, but not in the way advertisements suggest. The vitamins she takes, those small, unassuming capsules, are not magic pills. They are reminders that the body is not separate from the psyche, that the outer self responds to the care given to the inner world. Vitamin D restores more than bone density, it reconnects her to light. Vitamin C repairs more than skin, it strengthens the very fabric of her resilience. Vitamin E protects more than cells, it preserves her sense of sacred continuity. When these nutrients are taken with intention, they become more than supplements. They become rituals. In the symbolic language of the psyche, ritual is how we translate the invisible into the visible. The outer glow becomes a reflection of the inner fire. This process is deeply feminine. Not in the gendered sense, but in the archetypal one. The feminine principle does not force or push. It allows, receives, and transforms through presence. Inner alchemy is a feminine act. It does not impose youth, but reveals essence. A woman who slows down, who listens to the rhythm of her own breath, who no longer measures her value in comparisons, is practicing this feminine wisdom. Her radiance arises not because she defies age, but because she embodies it fully. She no longer views her body as a project to fix, but as a vessel to honor. She no longer chases relevance. She becomes the context in which relevance is redefined. There is also a kind of healing that takes place in this alignment. For decades, many women have carried a split within themselves, the ideal self shaped by external expectations and the true self buried beneath. That split creates fatigue. It erodes vitality. But when inner alchemy begins, those two selves start to speak to one another. The woman begins to forgive her younger self for what she didn't know. She embraces the aging self not as loss, but as evolution. And in that reconciliation, something luminous begins to stir. The body, no longer at war with itself, relaxes. The muscles soften. The eyes become clearer. The smile becomes unforced. This is not appearance. It is presence. The world may struggle to name this kind of beauty because it does not fit into conventional categories. It is not the beauty of youth, nor the elegance of fashion. It is the beauty of soul. It is seen most clearly in those rare moments when a woman sitting quietly radiates something inexplicably powerful. Not loud, not demanding, but undeniable. She has become her own source of light. Her skin carries the memory of laughter and pain. Her posture speaks of trials endured and truths accepted. And all of this, the entire spectrum of lived experience, has been distilled into a singular, magnetic authenticity. This is the outer glow born from inner alchemy. It cannot be faked. It cannot be bought. It arises only when the outer world and inner life begin to mirror one another, each honoring the sacred process of the other. In the quietude of her 60s, the woman stands at the edge of a forgotten threshold, not toward decline, but toward return. This return is not a going back, not a regression to some idealized former self, but a movement inward deeper, beyond the many masks worn through the decades. It is a return to the self, capital S, an archetypal center that has waited in silence, unmoved by external fluctuations, unscarred by time. To look younger and more attractive at this stage is not to mimic the outer traits of youth, but to embody the inner sense of wholeness, completeness, and truth that was once buried beneath obligations, roles, and cultural noise. This is not about appearance as surface. It is about essence as radiance. The self is not a goal to be achieved. It is a presence to be remembered. It has always been there, whispering through intuition, sighing through dreams, watching as the ego constructed and deconstructed identities: daughter, lover, mother, wife, professional, caretaker. Each of these identities formed part of the journey, but none of them, alone, held the totality. Now, with the outward striving slowing and the social mirrors less frequent, the woman begins to sense something different. A stillness, a call from within. The image of attraction, of beauty, of youthful vitality begins to shift. It is no longer rooted in how others see her, but in how she sees herself, in her capacity to recognize the eternal within the changing. In Jungian psychology, this stage is part of individuation, the process by which a person becomes whole. In earlier life, we adapt, perform, seek approval, fulfill roles. But in the later stages, especially after 60, there is an opportunity to disengage from the performance and align with authenticity. This alignment is not without resistance. The ego, trained to seek outward validation, may struggle to release its old ways. There may be moments of grief, mourning the perceived losses, beauty as once defined, youth, energy, attention. But if the woman surrenders to the deeper flow, she will begin to see what was not visible before, that the self was never absent, only overshadowed. The return to the self often begins with a reevaluation of time. She starts asking different questions. Not how to look young, but how to feel alive. Not how to be desired, but how to be true. These questions are sacred keys, unlocking chambers of the psyche that were sealed by years of habit and external focus. And as she opens those doors, she rediscovers elements of herself that were left behind, not discarded, but dormant. The love of solitude, the joy in simplicity, the fierceness of her own intuition, the wisdom in her hands, her voice, her silences. This kind of inner rooting alters how she moves in the world. She no longer walks into a room, wondering if she measures up, but simply arrives as herself, unfiltered. This presence is magnetic. Not because it begs attention, but because it emanates certainty. And this certainty, the deep knowing that one has nothing to prove, is perhaps the most attractive force a person can emit. It draws others not through seduction, but through truth. The woman who has returned to herself radiates something timeless, not the perfection of form, but the coherence of being. Her choices shift as well. She is no longer compelled to dress for approval, but for expression. She selects colors that feel like her inner landscape. She chooses food that nourishes rather than restricts. Her routines become rituals. Her beauty care is not an act of camouflage, but of devotion. Even the vitamins she takes each morning are now offerings to her temple, body, not desperate attempts to fix, but conscious acts of alignment. She is not at war with aging. She is in relationship with it. She learns to read the changes in her skin and bones as language. Her body's evolving dialogue with time and spirit. This return to the self is also a spiritual emergence. No longer split between who she is and who she should be, she becomes whole. She sees in the mirror not just a face, but a face shaped by laughter, grief, endurance, and love. She remembers that her worth is not in being seen, but in seeing. She becomes the seer, not just the seen. Her eyes, once turned outward in search of recognition, now gaze inward and find familiarity. She is no longer foreign to herself. The terrain of her inner world is now home. In this home, she finds peace, and this peace creates beauty, a beauty untouched by trend or time, a beauty that no longer shrinks itself to fit expectations, but expands to fill its own truth. People may say she looks younger, but it is not youth they're seeing, it is presence. They may comment on her glow, but it is not skincare that shines. It is the soul, remembered and revealed. She is not performing youth, she is embodying essence. She is no longer fragmented between role and reality. She has returned, finally, to herself.